smiled as she carefully planned her husband's death. In her mind, the 80 million naira inheritance was already hers. Everything was perfect, every detail flawless. But what she didn't know was that the river she chose to hide her crime was already watching her. The skyline gleamed against the morning sun, reflected perfectly on the smooth surface of the river that ran alongside the estate. Skyscrapers and city lights mirrored faintly in the water, blending modern luxury with a deceptively calm natural element. On the terrace of their sleek riverside home, Amaka adjusted the silk scarf around her neck, her heels clicking lightly against the polished stone floor. She sipped her cappuccino slowly, her eyes following her husband, Obinna, as he stood by the floor-to-ceiling window reviewing charts on his tablet. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, admired, enviable, untouchable. He was a successful entrepreneur. She was elegant, ambitious, and socially poised. But behind the flawless Instagram-worthy smiles and the gleaming marble floors, Amaka's mind was a storm of calculation. Every compliment she had given, every tender touch she had shown, had been measured and rehearsed for maximum effect. $80 million. She whispered under her breath, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of the city beyond the river. All his, and soon, all mine. Obinna looked up from his tablet, unaware of her thoughts, smiling as if nothing in the world could tarnish their perfect life. "Morning, Amaka," he said warmly, holding the tablet in one hand while gesturing toward her coffee. "Already enjoying the view?" Amaka's lips curved into a serene, practiced smile. "Of course," she said, tilting her head slightly, letting the morning sun illuminate her flawless makeup. "And enjoying your company as well." Her heart, however, was far from warmth. Beneath the surface, ambition surged like a river of fire. The estate's polished floors and sleek furniture, the designer clothes, even Obinna's trust. All were tools in her mental chess game. She had planned meticulously, knowing that every gesture, every word, every smile could bring her closer to the fortune she coveted. Later that day, she approached him with an idea that seemed harmless, even romantic. "Why don't we take a private trip to the river tomorrow?" she suggested, her voice soft, melodic. "Just you and me. A day to escape everything, just for us." Obinna's eyes brightened. "Perfect. I can't remember the last time we had a day like that." He smiled, completely oblivious to the hidden motives behind her words. "Just the river, the sun, and you." The river, as placid as it appeared, hid secrets beneath its shimmering surface. Locals had whispered for centuries about the mystical waters near the city, that they were blessed, that they chose who to favor and who to punish. Though these were old tales, the stories carried a subtle warning. Those driven by greed never escaped unscathed. Amaka, of course, had never believed them, or so she thought. That evening, as twilight bled across the horizon, she found herself alone on the terrace, gazing at the river that snaked like silver through the modern estate. Its reflection shimmered like liquid light, hypnotic and almost otherworldly. The current was gentle, serene, yet something beneath the surface seemed alive, pulsating softly. She shivered, not from fear, but anticipation. "Just one moment," she whispered to herself, pressing her fingers against the railing. "One move, and it's mine." Amaka had spent months preparing, analyzing every opportunity, studying every habit of her husband. She knew his routines, his strengths, his weaknesses. Obinna trusted her completely, and that trust would become her weapon. Yet, tonight, staring at the river's reflective surface, she sensed something she hadn't counted on. A faint shimmer moved against the current, subtle, deliberate, almost like a warning. She shook her head, forcing herself to focus. "No, this is perfect. Everything is perfect." The next morning, the couple prepared for their outing. Amaka chose an outfit that blended elegance with subtle authority. A tailored cream blazer over a sleek blouse and pencil skirt, heels clicking confidently against the marble floors. Obinna wore a casual linen shirt and designer chinos, relaxed and carefree. They drove to the riverfront in Obinna's luxury SUV, the city skyline slowly disappearing behind them as they approached the estate's private stretch of water. The river gleamed under the morning sun, modern landscaping framing its banks. Sculpted stones, minimalist benches, and carefully planted greenery gave it the feel of a private resort. The calm water reflected the sky so perfectly it seemed unreal, almost magical. "This is amazing," Obinna said, stepping onto the stone walkway that led to the water. "You've really made this perfect, private, peaceful." Amaka smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of her lips. "I just thought it would be special, memorable, just for us." She followed him closely, her heels making soft, controlled clicks on the stone floor. Each step was measured, each gesture precise. The audience of the story, if there were one, would already be feeling the tension in her deliberate calm. As they approached a secluded bend where the water curved, Amaka suggested, "Why don't you sit for a moment? I'll grab some water from the fountain." Her tone was soft, innocent. Her eyes, however, measured the exact spot she had chosen for the plan she had been cultivating. Obinna bent down to sit, oblivious to the danger. "Sure. Go ahead," he said, smiling. "I trust you." Amaka's pulse quickened. One step, one move, and it would all be hers. Yet, as she moved closer to the edge, her foot slipped slightly on the polished stone. The current shimmered more brightly than before, small ripples moving deliberately against the flow. The air seemed charged, almost vibrating with unseen energy. "It's just the wind," she told herself. "It's just a trick of the morning sun. Focus." But the river seemed to whisper, gentle yet firm, a presence she could not ignore. The shimmer beneath Obinna's feet grew, subtle yet undeniable. He remained unaware, calm, his aura almost glowing in the sun's light. A silent shield she could not comprehend. Amaka forced herself to crouch as if examining a plant near the river's edge. Her hands hovered carefully, her heart racing. Every muscle tensed with anticipation. One step, and her carefully planned fortune would be hers. A faint ripple passed beneath Obinna's shoes. She blinked, startled. A chill ran down her spine. Blessed by the river, the thought was sudden, terrifying, yet exhilarating. The legend she had ignored all these years seemed suddenly real, and real in the one way that could ruin her plan before it even began. She shook her head, forcing a calm smile. "It's just water, just superstition." Yet the river pulsed, subtly, deliberately, as if it already knew her intentions. Obinna stood and stretched, blissfully unaware of her gaze. "Shall we walk along the bend?" he asked. Amaka's lips curved. "Of course," she said, stepping carefully behind him. Her mind raced with calculations and contingencies, but the river had begun its quiet warning. One misstep, one hesitation, and everything could unravel. The sun climbed higher, and the modern riverfront gleamed, pristine and serene, hiding the ancient power beneath. Amaka's ambition and greed were ready to strike, but the first whispers of resistance, subtle, unexplainable, supernatural, had already begun. The stage was set. The plan was perfect. The river, however, had its own plans. And by the time the morning turned to noon, nothing, not even Amaka's carefully controlled ambition, would remain untouched by forces she could not see, nor understand. The morning sun reflected off the river like molten silver, glinting across the glass and steel of the modern estate's private riverside terrace. Mist lingered lightly over the water, and the hum of the distant city felt like a faint heartbeat against the serenity of the estate. Amaka adjusted the sleeve of her designer blouse and inhaled deeply, the scent of freshly cut grass mingling with the faint aroma of her cappuccino from the morning. Today, everything had to go perfectly. Obinna walked ahead of her along the stone-paved walkway that traced the river's edge, running his hand along the railing, casual, confident, unaware. That trust, that unshakable belief in her, was the key to her plan. Her pulse quickened as she followed, heels clicking lightly against the stone. Every step brought her closer to the moment she had been preparing for months. "Isn't it beautiful here?" Obinna asked, looking out across the calm water. "It feels almost untouched." Amaka smiled softly, letting the warmth of her voice mask the storm inside. "Yes, untouched, private. A place where you can forget the world." She allowed her hand to brush his lightly, a gesture casual enough to seem affectionate, deliberate enough to measure his weight and distance. The bend in the river was perfect. A slight curve, deep water, and a mossy stone walkway that gave just enough instability to make the perfect slip plausible. She crouched momentarily, pretending to admire a cluster of ornamental plants along the edge, her eyes flicking toward Obinna's polished shoes. The shimmering reflection beneath them was not just sunlight. She could feel something alive in the water, an energy almost imperceptible, pulsing beneath the calm surface. Her heartbeat quickened. One step, one movement, and everything would be hers. "Obinna, look at this," she said suddenly, lifting a bright flower and pointing toward it. So vivid, like it's glowing. He leaned in, his eyes reflecting the sunlight. "Wow, it really is. You always notice the little things." He smiled warmly at her, completely unaware of the danger in her gaze. Amaka crouched lower, pretending to adjust the hem of his linen pants. Her hands brushed his knee, brushing lightly as if steadying him, but her mind raced with the steps she had memorized. One gentle nudge, one slip, The water would swallow him before he could react. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from hesitation, from anticipation. Yet the river pulsed. Small ripples moved against the gentle flow, subtle but undeniable. Her breath caught. She shook her head and forced a smile. Just the wind, just reflections. Nothing can stop me. Obinna straightened, laughing softly. You've been so thoughtful lately. Everything you do. It's perfect. Her lips curved, hiding the quickened pulse in her throat. Perfect execution, perfect payoff. She reached closer under the guise of steadying him again, the sun reflected off the water, glimmering like molten metal. For a split second, she saw something in the reflection. A halo of light around his feet, shifting alive. Her stomach dropped, blessed by the river. The thought came unbidden, chilling her from the inside out. Amaka shook her head violently, trying to banish the warning. Focus. One step at a time. Everything has been planned. She forced herself to bend lower, pretending to examine the flower, while secretly calculating the final movement. A sudden gust of wind swept across the riverfront, tossing her hair into her eyes and making the decorative plant sway unnaturally. The stones beneath her heels were slicker than she remembered. Panic flared, but she pushed it down. Her ambition, her greed, her rehearsed control, all demanded she continue. Obinna's voice interrupted her thoughts. Are you sure you're steady? He asked, noting the slight trembling in her hand. Yes, of course, she said, forcing a calm tone. Her smile was perfect. Inside, fear clawed at her chest. The river responded. The shimmer beneath Obinna's feet grew, wrapping subtly around his legs like a protective aura. The water's movement was deliberate now, a pulse she could not ignore. Her plan, so perfect, so calculated, began to falter. Amaka leaned closer, pretending to tie a loose shoelace, her eyes scanning the current. A ripple raced against the flow, faster than any wind could create. Something unseen had awoken. Her pulse raced. Sweat beaded at her temple, her heart pounding in her ears. One step, one slip, and the river, which should have been her tool, was becoming an obstacle she could not predict. Obinna remained calm, a stark contrast to her rising panic. The air seemed heavier around him, charged with something ancient and unseen. The shimmer around his feet intensified. He did not understand it fully, but he felt it. A protection that no human hand could grant. Amaka whispered softly, almost to herself, "It's just superstition, just water, nothing can stop me." The river pulsed again, stronger this time, subtle waves rising and curling around him protectively. The decorative plant swayed as if alive, and the sunlight caught the surface of the water in strange flashes, making the shimmer look like eyes watching her every move. Her knees bent slightly, feigning a stumble, but the current seemed to resist her, guiding her back subtly, impossibly. Her mind raced, her plan unraveling with every heartbeat. Obinna finally looked at her, curiosity in his eyes. "Amaka, are you all right?" Yes, she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. Just enjoying the morning. She forced herself to stand straight to mask her panic. The river's protection had revealed itself, subtle yet undeniable. The one advantage she had relied on. Secrecy, surprise, planning, was slipping through her fingers. A sudden reflection caught her eye. The light around his shoes glimmered brighter, like a halo. The shimmer moved slowly up his legs, rising toward him. Her breath hitched. No, this can't be happening. She took a step back, feigning concern as she pretended to adjust her scarf. The river responded with a subtle wave, brushing the tips of her heels, warning her to stop. She felt a tremor of true fear, not for herself, but for her plan. Everything she'd rehearsed, every meticulous step toward the $80 million inheritance, was now at risk. Obinna, still unaware of the danger he had narrowly escaped, gestured toward the river bend. "Shall we walk along the water for a bit?" Amaka forced a smile. "Of course," she said, her steps careful, measured. But deep inside, she felt the first real crack in her confidence. The river, which should have been a silent observer, had awakened. And it was no longer neutral. The sun climbed higher, catching the glass panels of the estate and making the modern riverfront glimmer like a jewel. Every stone, every reflection, every ripple seemed imbued with intent. Amaka's plan, once flawless, now had to contend with a force she could not see, predict, or control. And in that precise moment, the modern river, sleek, luxurious, yet ancient in its power, reminded her that ambition unchecked, greed untempered, and deceit against what is blessed would never go unpunished. The stage was set, perfectly modern and yet timelessly mystical. The first move of her plan was ready, but the river, alive in ways she could never anticipate, had already begun to intervene. The calm morning belied the storm rising beneath the surface. And for Amaka, the game had just begun. A game where she no longer controlled the rules. By mid-afternoon, the modern riverfront had transformed from a serene luxury retreat into a stage charged with tension. Sunlight danced off the glass facades of the estate, glinting across the calm water, yet beneath that glittering surface, the river throbbed with an energy Amaka could no longer ignore. She followed Obinna along the stone walkway that curved gently along the river's edge, keeping her steps measured, her smile perfectly poised. But every instinct screamed at her, the river was alive. Subtle currents twisted against her movements, faint glimmers of light shimmered beneath Obinna's shoes, and the air felt heavier with every breath. "Obinna, are you sure this is safe?" she asked, feigning concern, her voice smooth and controlled. "Of course," he said, glancing at her with a warm smile. "The river, it feels almost magical today, doesn't it?" Amaka's pulse quickened. "Magical, yes, but not in the way you think." Her fingers itched to push the plan forward, to make the accident happen, to claim the $80 million that had been her obsession for months. Yet now the river itself seemed to resist, subtle but unmistakable. She crouched, pretending to adjust the hem of his pants, and her heart leaped at the shimmer beneath his feet. The glow that had been faint yesterday had grown, swirling around him like a halo. The water pulsed rhythmically, almost sentient, wrapping around his shoes and ankles, lifting slightly with each breath. "Blessed by the river." The words repeated in her mind, each pulse of the water amplifying the terror she had never felt before. Amaka forced herself to stand, hiding her fear with a flawless smile. "Just admire the view," she said softly, gesturing toward the river. Her fingers trembled slightly, betraying her composure, but Obinna did not notice. He trusted her completely, a trust she had planned to exploit. The first subtle wave swept along the stone walkway, brushing against her heels. She stumbled slightly, feigning balance. The current had begun to push back. Impossible. It's just water. Yet the shimmer grew stronger. Tiny points of light rose along the river's surface, flickering like fireflies. They coalesced around Obinna's legs, climbing higher in a protective cocoon that made her stomach twist with dread. You feel that too, right?" Obinna asked casually, tilting his head toward the water. His smile was calm, but there was curiosity in his eyes. "Something about the river, it's unusual today." Amaka's lips curved into a smile, but inside, fear gnawed at her. "Yes, it's unusual, and it's working against me." She crouched again, pretending to pick up a decorative stone, but every motion seemed subtly resisted by an unseen force. The wind picked up, tossing her hair into her face and rippling the fabric of her blouse. Leaves and small debris skittered across the terrace, but Obinna remained perfectly still. His calmness, his composure contrasted sharply with her rising panic. The river had begun to assert itself openly. She bent closer to tie an imaginary loose shoelace, her eyes locked on the faint glow rising along his legs. The air thrummed with an energy she could feel in her bones. It was a warning, a push, an undeniable presence. Every move she made, the river seemed to counter. Amaka's plan, once meticulously rehearsed, began to collapse. One misstep, one hesitation, and everything would unravel. The $80 million she had plotted to claim, the luxury, the freedom, the life she had envisioned, now seemed like a distant mirage. "Amaka, what's wrong?" Obinna asked, stepping closer. His voice was calm, but edged with concern. "Nothing, just startled by a reflection," she replied, forcing a laugh, shaking slightly. The shimmer of light beneath his feet seemed to respond to her voice, pulsing stronger. The river's whispers grew louder, though she could not understand the words. It was not human language. It was older, deeper, commanding. A current rose subtly beneath Obinna, lifting and curling like it was alive. The light around him intensified, forming a protective aura she could not penetrate. Her throat went dry. It's just water," she muttered under her breath, shaking. "Just superstition." The river surged, sending a subtle wave against her feet. She stumbled backward, breath catching in her throat. The shimmer coiled around Obinna's legs like silver flames, rising slowly, impossibly, reaching toward his knees. The breeze carried whispers that sounded like laughter and admonition intertwined, mocking her ambition and warning her against her greed. "Please, I can still fix this," she whispered to herself. Her mind raced, searching for a way to regain control. But nothing worked. The shimmer followed every move, the unseen current nudged her back, and the river pulsed as if it knew her intentions. Obinna turned slightly, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Amaka, the river, it's protecting me. I can feel it. Her knees buckled slightly. Panic surged. Her carefully rehearsed plan, the slip, the fall, the accident, had been rendered impossible. The river was no longer passive. It had chosen him, and she was powerless against it. The wind howled across the terrace, lifting her hair, tossing light reflections across the water. Leaves, petals, and small debris danced unnaturally in the air, forming patterns that seemed intentional, deliberate, almost like the river itself was communicating. Amaka dropped to her knees, overwhelmed, heart pounding. Every ounce of ambition, every ounce of control felt like it had been stripped away. She realized with chilling clarity that the river was alive, protecting Obinna, judging her, and undoing her every move. You can't do this, she cried, her voice breaking. I've planned everything. It should be mine. The river pulsed again, stronger, responding as if it had heard her words. Water lifted slightly around her feet, not to harm, but to remind her of the balance she had dared to disrupt. She was trapped in a moment of powerlessness she had never experienced. Obinna stepped closer, calm, glowing softly in the afternoon sun. Amaka, this isn't just a river. It's alive. It watches, it protects, and it punishes. Her breath caught. Fear replaced greed. The shimmer spiraled upward, a halo of light that wrapped around him completely. Her carefully calculated steps had no effect. Every attempt to move closer was resisted, the invisible current forcing her back. The decorative plants swayed as if alive, the sunlight caught on droplets of water in the air, casting glimmers of light like stars. The river had become a living presence, a sentient, protective, supernatural force. Amaka fell fully onto the stone terrace, drenched from a sudden spray, shaking with panic. Her plan had failed before it had begun. The ambition she had nurtured, the greed that had driven her, now seemed fragile, childish, meaningless. Obinna's gaze remained on her, calm, unwavering. The river pulsed gently, still glowing, still protective. The supernatural presence was undeniable, a force far beyond her understanding or control. Her heart pounded, terror overtaking her desire. The realization struck her like lightning. She could not overcome the river. She could not trick it. She could not win. The shimmer pulsed one last time around him, brighter than ever, wrapping him in an aura of protection. Amaka's eyes widened as the truth became undeniable. Her greed would meet its reckoning, and the river's judgment had only just begun. The stage was set for the final confrontation. Ambition versus the supernatural. Greed versus protection. And as the modern estate glistened in the afternoon sun, the river whispered its warning, a promise that nothing, not even a calculated plan or modern cunning, could escape its reach. The sun hung low over the modern riverside estate, casting long, golden reflections across the shimmering water. The city skyline glimmered faintly in the distance, but here, on the terrace overlooking the private river, time seemed to bend. Every stone, every railing, every glint of sunlight appeared imbued with a latent energy, a reminder that the river was no ordinary water. Amaka's heart pounded violently in her chest. She crouched behind a sleek stone planter, wet from the mist rising from the river, trembling as she watched Obinna stand perfectly still, glowing faintly in the late afternoon light. The shimmer around his feet had intensified into a luminous aura, wrapping him like an invisible fortress. Each pulse of the water resonated through her body, a silent judgment that froze her ambition cold. You can't do this, she hissed, her voice barely audible over the soft splash of the water. I planned everything. It should have been mine. Obinna turned, calm, his modern designer linen shirt catching the sun. Amaka, the river. It sees everything, he said softly. It protects those it favors, and punishes those who betray trust. The river pulsed in response, shimmering like liquid silver. The current lifted subtly, curling around his legs protectively. Tiny sparks of light rose from the water and danced around him, tracing the air with ethereal patterns. The modern estate, all sleek lines and polished surfaces, seemed suddenly insignificant against the power unfolding in front of her. Amaka stumbled backward, clutching at the polished railing, her carefully rehearsed plan slipping entirely from her grasp. Each step toward him was subtly resisted, the water seemingly alive, guiding her away, warning her. This isn't real, she whispered, panic rising, her voice cracking. It's just water. You can't stop me. The river answered, rising slightly in a wave that did not harm him, but circled her, lifting her heels off the ground for a brief, terrifying moment. The whispers of ancient voices flowed through the air, unintelligible yet commanding. They seemed to mock her ambition, reminding her of every misdeed, every greed-fueled thought. Amaka's eyes widened in terror. She had plotted every detail, measured every movement, calculated every escape. And yet, here she was, powerless, exposed, facing a force she could not comprehend. Obinna stepped forward. The light surrounding him intensified, spilling across the terrace in a soft, radiant glow. Amaka, this is your warning. Greed can blind a person, but the river, it does not forgive. What did you get to learn from this story? Kindly drop your thoughts and questions below. Do well to hit the subscribe button to see more emotional and exciting stories like this on Afrotales by Siri.